Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Watchmen. We're just a couple of dudes sitting on the wall watching the world go by. It's been a couple of weeks. Been on vacation and workload, and at this point, reintroduce Checkmate. How we doing, Checkmate?
Very good, Mon Capitan. We're back by popular demand.
That's right. I know several of you have been wondering where we've been. Well, work and vacation. I think it's been a couple, 3 weeks since we've last done this. So we are literally going to focus on parts of the world from Sri Lanka down here off the southern coast of India to Sweden, Finland, NATO. But we're going to start where we always start, and that would be in Israel. A little bit of political upheaval since we've last spoken. The government has dissolved, and there is a new prime minister in Israel. His name is Yair Lapid. I don't know a whole lot about Mr. Lapid, and this is where I'm going to rely on Checkmate's expertise. What do you know about Mr. Lapid?
Most of my contacts in Israel run in conservative circles, so naturally their impression of him is about what mine is that he's an empty suit and a used car salesman, but damn, he looks good doing it. And that's really about the extent of it. It was already pre-agreed that that coalition, that he would assume the prime ministership after a certain interval. So now that the coalition has effectively disintegrated, he is the prime minister, but he's a caretaker prime minister, so he doesn't have the Knesset to confer certain powers that are inherent in the prime ministership. So until they do another election, we've got some of the 80s kids will remember Joe Isuzu. That's effectively who we have for a prime minister in Israel.
There we go. And elections, they've even been kind of disputing and arguing over, well, when are we going to hold re-elections? And the latest I have heard, those elections are set for November 1st. So, I mean, we've got August, September, October. We got a good 4 months of essentially leadership that has no real mandate, lame duck, if you will. And it makes me wonder what some of Israel's enemies may attempt to do over the next 4 months as they see this guy. And then, as a result of that, this is from Amit Segal. He's an author, and he put this tweet out. I got this Jose, and Jose, I'm sorry, I forget your last name. You sent me onto this as a resource, and I'm glad you did. Tweet he put out, even from the perspective of 5 election campaigns, this was the most amazing event of all. Late at night, he entered the office of Rabbi Chaim Druckman, the elder rabbi of religious Zionism, chairman of Thunder, Mansour Abbas. 2 religious people, one former hawk and one present, sat down to see if it was possible to cooperate and form a government for Netanyahu. So you already got, allegedly, different coalitions of parties trying to wheel and deal to help somebody form a government. In this case, it would appear Benjamin Netanyahu is going to try to make another run at it. But my takeaway from this is, and I know you have some thoughts on this, is it's like we're going to see all kinds of crazy combinations of political parties in Israel to try to cobble together some form of government. And this seems over the top. It doesn't look like it's something that you would expect to happen. What types of things are you hearing from Israel?
Well, Segal is a plugged-in guy, so Jose, kudos to you for passing that along. He is plugged in. He's worth listening to. I don't tend to get enough into the weeds of Israeli politics to deeply figure where Segal comes from, but generally speaking, if he posits something, it's got some good credibility to it, at least as being a valid perception for a good chunk of the Israeli body politic. With respect to Netanyahu, Yeah, he's out there. Yeah, he's maneuvering and making an effort to roll back in on politics. To his fellow travelers, from what I pick up, it's just a non-starter having him back in office. Uh, the coalition that was ineffectual almost as soon as it took office. I'm fond of pointing this out on Fighting Checkmates on Valor Tube, where you can tube bigly. It's one of those things where the government formed. Its two core tenets were nuclear, Iran, bad, and anybody but Netanyahu to lead Israel. And that was really about it. It was a coalition formed on rejection, and so Netanyahu, he's been around long enough that he's made enough enemies in his own tent that it would be an awful big throw. So the conservatives who I speak to in Israel, which is throughout the course of this, not many because they're obviously preoccupied, are saying long shot, don't see it happening. But you never know. God gets a vote in all of this, and so do the circumstances that God permits to materialize through it.
And that's a great point you make there, because ultimately, as I sit here and watch this, there's a vacuum in leadership in Israel. And if this is the time that's leading up to, a 7-year tribulation, or the end of days, as the Bible would put it, the last days, we know that at some point an antichrist character leader is going to emerge onto the stage and take charge. Now, if there's strong leadership, there's no need for any kind of bad guy to come onto the scene. But as long as Israel continues to fumble around, I think this is at least the 5th or 6th election coming up in the last 4 years. It's setting the stage for somebody really bad to take over. But he's going to be loved by everyone, and he will convince everyone, all parties, hey, this is the guy to go with. And then things are going to turn really sour in the last 3.5 years of this 7-year period. But for now, no leadership. They're kind of rudderless where they're going, and I think it's something. Again, if this is the time that we talk about, the time we think that we're headed towards, I would expect this trend to continue. And as an outflow of that, Israel continues to want to become energy independent, and we're moving out to off the coast of the Mediterranean toward the Karish gas field. And our friends in Lebanon, Hezbollah, that's a translation, the party of God subsidized by the Iranians, they decided to launch 3 drones at this gas rig out in the middle of the Mediterranean. Now, Israel took them out. For those of you not sure where we're talking about, this is Lebanon here to the north, Israel here to the south, and here's the Karish gas field, clearly within Israeli international waters. Now, the folks in Lebanon had to kind of bend this line, curve it a little bit to make it part of their international boundaries. But, I know you had some thoughts on how this all broke down, this little incident out in the Med.
It's interesting. The Israeli Navy has been very busy providing security to the explorations and the drilling that's going on in their territorial waters, as you might suspect, and pulling a lot of maritime security. And the vaunted Israeli Air Force apparently had first dibs on shooting down these drones, and as I heard it, they missed. The Israelis, their Air Force is generally they've got a propaganda machine that is just second to none. And they're good, but they're not us. They're not Top Gun Maverick. But they're good. Apparently, it was the Israeli Navy that ended up hitting the drones and taking them out. I think in the J-Post story there, it just says the IDF. And I've sort of noticed that the Israeli Air Force, they're always quick to jump to the head of the line that it was them in stuff like this. But Nevertheless, yeah, the map that you pointed to from memory, these are the subject of ongoing negotiations, that territorial boundary. And it's gotten to the point now to where the Israelis are actively considering giving up access to deposits for the purposes of just settling the maritime dispute in hopes of saving themselves headaches and massive capital expenditures of having to deal with an emerging maritime threat coming from Hezbollah. The other thing that does for our purposes in the Ezekiel 38-39 world is if they can settle this maritime dispute, it takes one more argument away from a Russian intervention, because you can't look at Lebanon and its territorial holdings apart from the decisions that emanate from Damascus. Without Lebanon, Syria is more enfeebled than it is, to the point that the government can't hold up. They need Lebanon. So Lebanon becomes how can I put it? It becomes a surrogate front for Russian involvement here. The problem is that the individual the United States appointed to head these talks, Amos Hochstein, is he's problematic. I try to limit myself. I only use the term deep state to convey something a lot of people have gotten their heads around, that there is sort of an informal set of interests that move between personal circles, professional familiarity, and their actual jobs in government and outside of it. That there's this sort of separate hive mind, if you will. So when I refer to deep state, that's kind of what I'm getting at. He's what you would call a card-carrying member of the deep state. And again, I run to the term deep state because most people now get it, what I'm referring to when I say that. So it's impossible to know what side deals might be getting cut, what sort of rapprochements being whispered in the margins of the various talks. And it has gotten to the point to where Hezbollah being Hezbollah, they don't trust where these talks are going. But at the same time, the big question becomes, will Hezbollah play too much of a spoiler because they could be rightly blamed by the people of Lebanon, who are in severe economic duress, for having spoiled their chance at rejuvenating their economy through some kind of offshore access.
I think this issue too, I know in the past you talked about, as you read through the Ezekiel 38-39 text, as you see it, it's almost like Russia gets dragged into this it's not like they want to get there, but they get pulled into it. The hook in the jaw, if you will. So, I'm sitting here looking at this, and it's like, one of the foregone outcomes, the last thing I would expect to see happen is that Lebanon gets its way. Because if they get their way, there's no need for Russia to come charging in here to.
Well, don't forget, there's a ton of other issues with respect to maritime demarcation that were hibernating quite nicely and really in nobody's mind. Occasionally there would be a fishing dispute. But we're talking about Greek Cyprus versus Turkish Cyprus, the water surrounding that. There's Turkey itself, has been seeking adjustments to maritime claims that impact these areas as well. So there's still plenty of stuff in terms of maritime disputes that is on the table.
Absolutely, and when you say that, the first thing that pops into my mind is somebody has got to guarantee security for all of this mess.
Yeah.
And for the free flow of gas. And to me, that's where just Russia has to step in and do it. And that's their stated outcome. They want to control gas flow from east to west into Europe. And really, this little sliver of fields out here, the Karish, the Tamar, the Leviathan that Israel has, and now Israel's exporting gas to Egypt, and Egypt liquefies it and sends it on to Europe. I mean, they're going to get ready to start cutting into Russia's pocketbook. So, and the more that happens, and the more gas they find, I think the more this thing escalates at some point.
For the moment, the high prices that we're paying at the pumps is forestalling a lot of it, because the Russians, while they have their hands full consolidating their position, and they are winning in Ukraine, the more they consolidate their position, and head into the peace talks with Ukraine from a position of strength, the more this stays off the table. But with the Israeli government in the paralysis that it's in, with effectively no viable national leadership, it opens the way for all kinds of gamesmanship, because the perception of national disunity is very powerful in the minds of a potential aggressor.
Yeah, and it's not only just Israel as you're talking about, but we had this happen this week. So I mean, Russia sees weak leadership not only in Israel, but in the West. Effectively, the government that was England, UK, resigned. I forget how many people resigned, and then Johnson, he finally resigned, and so that's getting ready to. There's a leadership vacuum clearly in the UK, and I'm sure that just emboldens Russia even further. They see weakness, so
it does, and it's because the UK, after the Cold War, the United States, of course, had a number of responsibilities to keep up with around the world. That as the Soviets sort of ceased to exist and cleaved into their spheres of influence, cleaved into pieces, and regional players started taking up the power vacuum. I believe there was a gentleman's agreement between London and Washington, and that was, okay, United Kingdom, you stay focused on the Russians, and we'll be co-pilot on that, while we focus on the other pieces of the world that we're still trying to get a handle on. And generally speaking, the UK has been primarily consumed in terms of its defense posture and its foreign policy, because half of the United Kingdom's body politic was trying to pull them into the European Union. Generally, it's been very what is referred to as Atlanticist. That's post-Cold War European-focused thinking, with Russia as the big threat. And so they've been in a long-running spy war that really hasn't calmed down since the end of the Cold War, and the UK is on the tip of the spear of that. Much of their military is oriented on handling post-Cold War Russian threats that are still things that you have to keep a good eye on, such as intercepting Russian bombers and keeping tabs on their fleet in the Atlantic. And so, with respect to the division in the West, that is the perpetual Russian dream, is to cultivate paralysis among not just NATO allies, but American allies, because we are still considered the principal adversary to the Russians. And so if our friends have become political basket cases, that ties down our thinking that much more, and they can have the run of the board in other places in the world.
Well, and then as we dovetail from little to weak leadership in UK, our fearless president is off to the Middle East this week. And again, another example of weak leadership, which has got to further embolden Russia, Putin. And then, we were talking about this beforehand. I mean, this trip, to me, he's going to go to Israel, what he believes to be Palestine, and then eventually to the Saudis. I mean, this thing to me is just, Lord knows what he's going to say, and is just ripe for all kinds of issues. And the first one we talked about was just potentially the market shock of, say, things go sideways, and MBS's response, Mohammed bin Salman's response, was say oil, and then the repercussions of that.
Yeah, and here we go back to the Russians. The Russians have played a very artful game of insulating their economy even further, and they'd already started before they invaded Ukraine, but they got kicked out of the global order of currency trading, and they went strictly to the ruble. That was a real boon for them, because they further insulated the Russian economy from outside shock. There are other countries that are looking at, what is it really getting us to be in the dollar? It's getting us a lot of problems these days, because the Americans are reckless about how they're spending and they're printing. And so in a situation like this, where the Chinese, who under President Xi, are looking for a win in the Middle East in terms of knocking America down a peg in the region, for them to have come, as we've talked about on this format before, to come in and say we would like to transact in yuan, as you pointed out, Paul, based on your conversations with bona fide economists, not armchair economists like you and I, they don't have the wasta to be able to throw around yuan in perpetuity. It's just they just don't have the monetary base for it. But when you think about the fragile state of the market and how thin the production margins are for the Saudis to begin with right now, I mean, they're pretty close to pumping at maximum capacity, as are the Emiratis, that if this meeting were to go bad and MBS to do things that he is reputed for doing, which is make hasty decisions, even if it were just a couple to a handful of transactions in the yuan, what is the potential market shock of that when most of Wall Street these days is holding its breath, waiting for what they call the everything bubble to burst? What are the second and third order consequences of that?
Absolutely. So the knock-on effects of that. And then, on top of that, we got Fed Chairman Powell, who is just hell-bent on continuing to raise interest rates. And then he's out there making conversations in his talks with the public about the idea of a crypto or an electronic equivalent to the dollar, where you too can sign up and have an account with the federal government. We'll hook you right up and you can get your dollar. And he says he needs to do this because of the changing economic currency landscape of the planet and to preserve the reserve status of the United States dollar. And I'm like, holy cow. And I know we've talked about this over the last month or two. They're already, MBS has dropped threats, comments, hey, we're looking at doing this. We're looking at making some transactions in the yuan, signaling to China, hey, we'll work with you. And I can't even imagine, say this goes down on a, late Friday, early Sunday, or they do it over, prior to a weekend. Can you imagine the chaos? Say this thing would get done Friday after the close of business, and then we wake up Monday morning and what the futures would be doing about this time on Sunday into Monday morning, what our world would look like. It would be absolutely insane.
Remember, Sunday is a work day in the Middle East.
That's correct. That's an excellent point.
Sabbath. And the other thing is that, the reason why I wanted the Al Arabiya piece to be in there is don't bother reading the Washington Compost article by Biden, because all he's doing is posturing to walk away with a victory. At least his new spokesperson, Admiral Kirby, or as I call him, Admiral Hair Product, because his reputation in the Navy was basically as a useless screamer who had great hair. But the issue with looking at the Al Arabiya is that it's a very practical look at how the Arabs are seeing this, is that Biden shot his mouth off pretty handily about the delinquencies of Saudi Arabia, when the Saudis actually have made a lot of gains in being responsible governing stewards in terms of liberalizing people's rights in the past 10 years. And so when Biden, who was just using the residue of the Khashoggi affair in Turkey, began impugning their human rights record at the same time, they're the ones who are really stepping up to the plate in terms of forming a cohesive response alongside the Israelis to Iran. They feel very betrayed right now. And so it's, as you said, when you open this up, we're looking at a Wile E. Coyote moment here, opening the Acme box potentially.
Well, in two, I guess you'd say to their credit or not to their credit, the Saudis over the last, I'd say, handful of years, and I suspect that the international community at large is doing the same thing too. They've done a much better job of looking at our calendar, especially in and around holidays, and will make some of these moves when we're on, quote, holiday or on vacation or celebrating Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever. And they will do things while our businesses, our markets are not open, and let these things run a couple of days before we can respond to it. And I suspect we're going to see more of that moving into the future.
And the other thing that the Saudis are really burned about was when Biden came into came into office, one of the first things he did was he cut the aid to fighting the Houthis in Yemen. And what people need to understand in terms of the implications for that is, yes, it's another front and it's another pressure point on international shipping lanes, because Yemen, of course, sits right next to the Bab el-Mandeb Straits between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Huge shipping route right there. Yeah, exactly, right there. Is that the Houthis have been, and the Iranians have been trying to influence that waterway, and that's important. But the weapons that the Houthis were using were against Saudi Arabia, against cities in Saudi Arabia, including the one the president is about to go to, is that they have been using improved Iranian technology designed to have better terminal guidance systems, meaning smart warheads, basically, who were designed by individuals who the Israelis reportedly have now killed off in Iran on their assassination campaign by the IRGC. But the damage is done. They exist and they work, and they've been validated in Yemen. And so if you look back at our Chapeau story where Hezbollah fired him at a rig that's at sea, you're talking about something that was debuted and was proved in combat and in actual use in Yemen. So this is a downstream consequence of cutting off the Saudis in their fight against the Yemeni.
Right. It's
what happened against that rig.
Yeah, we pulled Patriot missile batteries from Saudi Arabia. That was one of the main things that we pulled. The United States pulled from the Saudis, and they sent them down to Australia and out into the Pacific because they thought China was a bigger threat. Well, holy cow, wouldn't it be delicious for the Saudis and the Chinese to get together? And it's like, what a match made, because of the United States in one action. It's like, okay, so you think we're a threat? China saying that to the United States, let's hook up with Saudi. I mean, economic, and then also the Saudis probably end up getting some sort of military cooperation out of the Chinese with the deal. And it's like, one decision and the ripple effects of that, like you talk about, and then the downstream play or the knock-on effect.
And the only effect that I can think of by putting the hammer on the Saudis when they first came into office is that they were attempting to compel the Iranians back to the table by giving the Iranians strategically something for nothing. Is that we're going to enfeeble the Saudis a little bit to show you we're serious about negotiating. The only thing I can think that makes the Iran deal so sweet to the administration, by the way, is that they have blackmail material on John Kerry and Barack Obama. That's the only thing I can think of. Now, I am serious when I say that. I'm convinced that's what it is.
I know.
It's
funny, not funny.
They're willing to say we want a deal or we're opening the books on what happened in 2015. I'm convinced that that's in there.
And then they end up with more cash and more. Oh, it's just nuts. So we got this mess with, and Biden. He's going to go to Israel. He also says he's going to take a little trip to the, quote, land of the Palestinians. My concern, this is bad foreign policy, and I frankly expect some of this to happen, as he goes to what is Israel, and he will eventually make his way. And you can see Google's done a nice job of carving out the West Bank and the Gaza Strip for a future Palestinian state. Thank you, Google. And then, Biden will talk about dividing up the land and dividing up the capital of Jerusalem, wanting to give East Jerusalem to the Palestinians as their capital. That has never, ever been a good foreign policy move for any country to divide the land of Israel and the capital. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And no more than 24 hours passes before something happens to said country.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if he were to ever sign something, not that we're looking at that being imminent at all, it's just not. But if he were to sign something agreeing to something like that, it was nice knowing you, state of Mississippi.
It's just crazy. And probably Delaware. He's from Delaware. Something would happen to Delaware. I don't know. Incoming nor'easter or who knows? Yeah. I mean, or his personal property. I remember. My gosh, it was W. Bush. Well, both Bushes were, New World Order and looking to divide the land. And Crawford, Texas took a hit. The Kennebunkport, Maine compound took a hit. I mean, all the Bush stuff.
Yeah.
They made some comment, and literally within 24 hours, damage happened to those places. It's just, and history's just frequent with those types of things. And I know people listening to this, oh, this is crazy talk. You've lost it. Well, look it up. It happens. Will continue to happen.
It happened. It happened.
And God takes His word seriously, and His will be done. So, no, or as you call him, resident of the United States, Rhodes, he's making his way over to the Middle East this week. I'm sure something will come of that. And then we go from that. And then there's our man MBS with Turkish President Recep Erdogan. I don't even know where to begin with this. I'm going to turn it over to you.
I really, I think the photo speaks for itself. I mean, just by the position of Erdogan's head, you can tell who the supplicant here is. And MBS, the Saudis been trying to get the Turks to basically get out of kingdom affairs. That was the whole point of the Khashoggi incident. And this is them burying the hatchet about as much as can be in the Middle East. So there you have it.
And the thing that is so amazing about this picture, I mean, you look at Erdogan, I mean, he is just a whipped dog. And he's going to go from what looks like the lowest of lows, and then we transition to this. He's coming out of this deal with NATO smelling like a rose. He is now agreeable. He had veto power to prevent Sweden and Finland from joining NATO. Well, oh, by the way, Biden and crew, well, would you be willing to consider this if we offer you some F-16s? Well, sure. And then he also, Erdogan, there's all kinds of, I think it's nonsense in regards to declaring the Kurds a terrorist group. He gets some reassurances on that. But, I mean, the guy goes from looking like a whipped pup in a picture with MBS to he gets exactly what he wants from NATO in reassurances with military equipment and one of his chief rival groups labeled a terrorist group. It's just amazing.
Yeah. It really is. It really is. Regionally wounded in the Middle East. That photo says it all, with his head canted slightly down and MBS's hand over top of his. That symbolism that you see in that picture right there, that plays big in the Middle East. Plays very big. And so you've got chastened in the Middle East and yet coming out ahead in NATO. I mean, it really just goes to, what a crazy world we live in. But I guess Erdogan, to go with the dog analogy a little further, every dog eventually has his day.
Well, I'll tell you what, this dog, he's something else. And I know we talk privately between the two of us. I'm continually amazed at this guy. The twists and turns of this guy's leadership, political maneuverings they are crazy. I don't know what else to say about it. It's over the top. So we're back in the Ezekiel 38-39. Turkey's going to play a role in that. And clearly they're swaying events, politics in Europe. And then we still have issues going on with Ukraine and with Russia. This is from Oleg Nikolenko, and he is a Ukraine government official. Russia's troops set fire to grain fields in Ukraine's fertile region. I'm going to skip the Z word. I remember this picture every time Russians say they care about global food security, and this will be the food security section. I know this keeps coming up in these reports. It's a big deal. It's getting worse. Currently, they are harvesting wheat and grains in Ukraine and Russia. And when you are setting fire to massive fields of grains, that will impair food availability to people. And again, you've got You got Russia, Ukraine, and India. 3 of the top 10 wheat producers on the planet are not exporting their wheat. This is going to be a problem. I've also seen, I didn't include any of these clips, but mines being placed in wheat fields. Combines go over mine, blow up the combine. Tractors trying to get into fields to work fields, run over a mine, blow up the tractor and the farmer. So, and I know you've talked about this in the past, you know, it may not necessarily be Russians. There are some bad actors in that part of the world doing some other damage as well.
I firmly believe that the Ukrainians are inflicting some of this damage themselves. I think one of the few people on Twitter who I actually pay attention to commenting about this war, he said it best: if only the Ukrainians were as good at war fighting as they are Twitter. And that really is true. They're very good. They're masterful propagandists, mainly because they have Western media on their side. In fact, they have Western media doing their work for them. The other thing that doesn't get mentioned in all of this is part of the reason why the shipping is backed up is that the way the Ukrainians planted their sea mine field, you know, even if both sides were willing to let ships in, the shipping companies they're not prepared to lose a ship over getting into port.
So it's kind of a twofold situation. You got sea mines, and then you've got destroyed ports. And is it worth the risk of even trying to get in there and get something?
That's right. That's right. I mean, you know, and you know, a lot of these, you know, when it comes to maritime trading, a lot of these ship captains, they will have run certain routes for years and years and years and years, and same thing with their crews. That these are the people who get in, get out the fastest and most efficiently. Yeah, you can send other ships in, but it actually does slow things down when you pull ships from elsewhere. And some of these shipping lines that are in the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean, they're marginal players. They're not like the really big ones like Hutchison Whampoa or Crowley Maritime. They might have 5 or 6 ships, and making a haul like this requires their entire fleet, and so they lose their entire business if, you know, they might go into the margins pretty hard if they lose a single ship.
So it's just not worth their risk. And I think this also plays into, you know, discussion we've had in the past. All this is doing is creating a black market, which Russia will benefit from higher grain prices, trade prices, black market prices, and they make more rubles. It's really pretty straightforward. So.
Right.
And with that, you had sent me this, and this about 7 to 10 days ago. This is from the Federalist. Dutch government launches Canadian-style crackdown on farmer protests, and this is spreading across Europe. I mean, at first it was its own outlier, and now we have the same thing taking place where farmers are starting to protest and blockade in Poland, Germany, and Italy.
Yeah. This thing has really, you know, this is once again a global populist movement. This is one of the standard bearers, and you know, unlike, for example, things like the Rose Revolution in Georgia back in 2004, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, I think it was the same year, 2004, 2005. A lot of these, you know, what people are referring to as the color revolutions. The reason why, you know, these agricultural movements, like the trucking movement in Canada and the trucking movement in the United States, for that matter, the reason why you know they're not AstroTurf is they're slow to get their act together. They're self-organizing, but they take some time. They don't have the guiding hand of massive resources and media pre-coordinated for them. They're also not getting very much coverage. You look at the Yellow Vest protest in France a couple years ago, the Gilets Jaunes, and they were highly organized and they were having a big impact on the French economy, but they didn't get much media play. These movements that are breaking out it started, of course, here in the Netherlands and has since spread. This really is a revolt against the European Union, because there is a concerted international pressure on food right now, considering the number of places in the United States and now around the world that are food processing plants that are going up, along with some of the restrictive regulations going into food production, as well as some of the you look at the FDA, for example, and the way they handled the baby formula shortage. There is a concerted international effort to put pressure on food, and so these people are heroes right here. And one young man even got shot at by the Dutch police over this entire episode.
Well, you look at what's going on in Europe. I mean, so Ukraine is at war. Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe. And then I didn't realize this, but in the northern part of Europe, the Dutch farmer is responsible for the largest amount of exports of food to the rest of Europe, vegetables and those sorts of things from the north. I mean, so Europe is getting squeezed literally in the north and in the south. And then you throw in Germany, Poland, and Italy, again, two in the north and another one in the south. I would not want to be living in Europe right now, from a food standpoint and from an energy standpoint. It could be a really cold, expensive winter in regards to heating costs and food costs. And again, they're harvesting now. We've been doing this countdown on this for going on 2 or 3 months now. And, within the next month or two, they're going to be planting crops for next year. And we're on the verge of having 2 seasons of food affected within about a 3 to 4 month period. And we're in the midst of it. It's on us. And then we got other breakdowns with these protests with farmers. And like you say, the trucking companies, we will continue to talk about food security. This is not going away. And it's one of the conditions at the onset of the tribulation.
And that's I know we're gonna move into the Sri Lanka thing shortly. That's one of the pressures in this, is that Sri Lanka is usually a leading indicator of where the developing world is going, in terms of if you want to know what economic trends are going to beset the developing world, look at Sri Lanka. And that was out of the mouth of a guy who I used to work for, who was the CIA chief of station in Sri Lanka. And he said it's almost always a trendsetter, at least for the eastern portions of Africa and Asia, what happens in Sri Lanka. And they're very vulnerable. And I think that the way it was put to me by a horticulturalist is he said, in America, yeah, we're going to see some shortages, but I think the thing most people will notice is they're really going to pay for food. He said other parts of the world are going to see famine.
Yeah, especially, and it's just like you're talking about. It's going to be North Africa and the Middle East.
Yeah, and I think the number of loose weapons that are out in the world right now. Some starving young men who can't pay for food for their young families is exactly what the world needs for peace and stability.
Yeah, and I mean, I've got this it's on like a robo recall or whatever you want to call it, where they just keep the video loop. This is out of Sri Lanka. Presidential palace has been stormed. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is said to have fled. So I'm sure
and before he left the palace, though, he was yelling, "Trump did it."
Blame it on Trump. And frankly, this is a factor in this. This is not the sole factor. Before I make my comment, those of you not familiar with Sri Lanka, it's off the coast of India. And so it's kind of isolated. There's Colombo down there in the south. They're on the southwest shore of Sri Lanka where this has taken place. But it's isolated and it's dependent on goods being shipped in for a lot of things. Formerly known as Ceylon, I'd like to get how many people are in Sri Lanka off the top of your head? Loaded question. Apologize.
I do not.
Okay. I want to say 2-3 million. It may be more than that.
Wikipedia, they're occasionally reliable.
Let's see if we can find that. Well, not even close. 22 million. So you got 22 million people on this little tiny island. Holy cow. That's a lot of people in a small space. And if they're short on things like gas and food and fuel, I mean, you can see what the outcome of this is. And then the other part I wanted to comment on, I think this is also an outflow, and I'm going to blame this on our Fed raising interest rates. And this is something I think we're going to be seeing, as you had mentioned earlier, from your experience formerly from the CIA. Emerging markets are going to be facing the wrath of a dollar that continues to show strength. And the more the dollar appreciates, the higher the debt on all this money our government loaned out to these people. And for years, especially, after 08, 09, and then also leading into COVID, print, free money, take it. Well, now we want to be paid our money back. And oh, by the way, it's not free. It's costing more. We want our money back with a price. And I think we're going to see this throughout emerging markets. I was looking at some currency stuff before we got on here, and especially across Africa. Just what the dollar has been a wrecking ball to some of these currencies across Africa. And again, speaks to what your contact was telling you, how Sri Lanka is a place we want to look at when it comes to these types of international affairs. And I think, you throw that in, like you say, no food, no money, no resources. I think this is something we're going to be seeing in the coming months across wide swaths and regions of our planet. So not a happy note to close on, but I and again, Revelation 6, the conditions of our planet prior to the onset at the onset of the 7-year tribulation is hyperinflation in regards to food and food shortages, pestilence, and war. And you can see real quick how some of this stuff gets here. And we got some real critical spots on our planet that are being impaired that fit into a potential narrative where these types of situations could occur. So, with that, you have any closing thoughts you want to share?
No, I think that pretty well covers it. Covers it with what I don't know, but I think it covers it.
Yep, I think that's the news. And again, we repeat this frequently. We're trending in the way that the Bible talks about of an end time scenario. Are we there? I don't know. Maybe 100 years off. I don't know the answer to that, or 1,000. But it sure would appear that all of these things that the prophets talked about, Jesus 2,000 years ago, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Daniel, up to 2,700 years ago, sure is looking like the world they described. And the characters.
And I would double down on that. Is if this is not the time of all of us are living through a period where we're getting a fantastic education to be able to pass down to succeeding generations, as this is what to look for. We lived through it, and we need to document all of this, how this all came to be, so that in addition, as a companion to Scripture, the contemporaneous history of that time we will have taken pains to assemble a body of thoughts as to how we got there this time.
Absolutely. Because it is unfolding in front of our eyes, and we are learning and watching what causes social, political, global breakdown. So on that positive note, we'll close this out.
Yeah, it was a happy one tonight.
That's right. Just a bundle of joy. And we'll catch you again. Appreciate everybody who takes time to listen to the Watchmen. Again, we're just a couple of dudes sitting on the wall watching the world go by. Appreciate you guys following along. Thanks a lot.
God bless.